Hi, I'm Liam Dann. Welcome to Money Talks. This is a podcast about our relationship with money. We're not going to tell you how to get rich, and we're not going to try and pick the next interest rate move. In this series, I'll be talking to some interesting New Zealanders about how money has shaped their lives and what they've learned about it through the years. This week, I'm talking to Rebecca Thomas, founder and CEO of boutique investment firm Mint Asset Management. UK-born, Rebecca made it to the top of the corporate ladder in Europe before giving it all up and settling in New Zealand, where she founded Mint and has played a key role in shaking up the local financial services sector. Kia ora, Rebecca. Welcome to Money Talks.
Kia ora, Liam.
All right, we'll get into sort of some of your knowledge and thoughts on money itself, but I do like to jump back in this podcast and ask people about their first memories of money and growing up. And so do you have a first memory of having your own money, holding money in your hand?
Yes, I do. So I was at primary school in the UK, and we had, as I'm sure you also had in New Zealand, we had like post office savings books, a savings bank. Mine was the Yorkshire Savings Bank, because that's where I was born. And we had to bring in money every week to put in our bank account, and we kept the book, and the teller updated our deposits. And then occasionally we went back to see how much compound interest we'd actually generated over a period of time. So obviously, that was in schools. I don't know when it stopped in the UK, but it certainly has stopped in the UK. But it was a really good, simple introduction to things grow if you keep investing and you do regular investing and the benefit of compound interest. So that was my first recollection. So
that your money can turn into some more money. And it must have stuck to some extent for the career you've had.
Yeah.
And did you have pocket money? You've talked about saving it, but were the things were you down the shops buying lollies and things with spare pocket money?
My parents didn't give us pocket money. The one thing they did do was, though, talk about money a lot. Yeah. Money was not a taboo subject in our household. My parents had both been entrepreneurs and were entrepreneurs in the early stages of our careers. My mother went to the Cordon Bleu cooking school, and she was a chef, and she'd worked overseas as a chef. And when she came back to the UK, she opened her own cafe with a Gaggia machine, a proper espresso machine in the 1950s.
Wow.
It was one of the first ones in Yorkshire at that time, and she was a massive pâtisseur, a baker. So she did all her own baking and sold all her baking goods, and she did that until she married my father at 25, and then she went back to it later. And my father had been the army had really interrupted his national service, had interrupted his plan to go to university. And so when he came out of the army, he became a car salesman, and then eventually started his own car dealership business.
Right. So that sort of entrepreneurial spirit came through a little bit, that you could think, and you were thinking about money, and you could imagine using it to do things.
Absolutely. But they gave us the ups and the downs of that, right? That we understood the options that we had relative to some other families. Certainly when we were in the state school system, all three children ended up going to private school through scholarships or bursaries when we were 11. But in primary school, we certainly understood that we were well off. But our parents made us really understand what it took to keep the lights on in their businesses. So there was no shying away from the fact that we needed to understand just how hard it was to run a business. And if you think about the 70s and the environment of power cuts and, the austerity and difficulties with rampant inflation in the 70s in the UK, it was a really difficult time for my father's business.
Yeah, it had to be tough to run a business then.
Yeah. So they did definitely talk to us a lot about what it took to keep the lights on in those businesses. Yeah.
And would it have been, is it sort of, I guess you only know what you knew, but compared to sort of parents on a stable salary, for example, did you notice that there was more ups and downs, even flow of the business in terms of how it was tracking and that sort of thing? Absolutely.
So, we would be going to school in a Rolls Royce one day, and then we'd be going to school in a Mini another day. Literally those are the true extremes.
Wow, yeah.
Depending on what stock my father had to actually sell at the time. But I think the important thing was that they didn't shy away from letting us parents know and actually understand that. But it certainly had an impact on my father's view of education. Having missed out on uni himself, he was absolutely determined that all three of the children needed a plan B, and he called plan B having to have a university degree. So it made him very, very focused on our education. And that was a big part of our existence growing up. I'm the eldest of three, two girls and then a boy. And he always, even though he was a bit of a bloke, he was very, very fair and equitable between the importance of education for the girls and the boy, all on the same playing field.
Sure. And so you grew up in Yorkshire. Was there a specific town that you were closest to, or a city you were closest to?
Scarborough. So
okay.
Are you going to Scarborough Fair?
Oh, yeah.
As in Scarborough. So seaside town. Yep. So my first job was cleaning holiday flats.
Right.
So people used to come from Manchester, Glasgow, Leeds, Bradford. They used to come to the seaside for a week's holiday. And my sister and I used to clean these holiday flats. So these flats used to take 12 to 14 people in multiple beds in multiple rooms.
This was before the days that the Brits were going to Greece and Spain.
Yeah,
and the same
going to
numbers.
Torremolinos. And yeah. This was what normal people did in terms of their holidays. They went to the seaside for a week. So we did. My parents were very keen. So we were cleaning the loos, changing the beds, and it certainly made me realise that there might be more to life than that. And I didn't want to keep doing that forever. But it was a grounding experience.
So that was as a teenager?
That was sort of 13, 14.
So what? So sort of an after school and weekend, school holidays really.
School holidays and weekends, because the clear out day was Saturday mornings. So everybody left on a Saturday morning and new people came in on Saturday afternoon. So we used to go down and do that in the afternoons on a Saturday.
So all of this, did it feed into sort of the career choices that you made, or even initially the choices you made about what to study at school and then university?
Well, certainly I wasn't really following my passion when I went to university, and I did Oxbridge 7th term. I then went away to the States for a year on a scholarship before going up to university. I was going to university to read English and classics. I ended up changing and reading law, and that was undoubtedly because my father thought that I needed to have a proper job. Yeah. My sister also did law, and she's a King's Counsel now. She carried on with it. So certainly that was, you need to have a proper job.
Yeah. So she made it through to the interesting stuff, but you probably, it sounds like you there's usually some quite dry stuff you've got to get through in order to start with.
There is dry stuff. So I loved all the glamour stuff because I was a barrister. So, two streams in England. So that's where you go to the courts and you do all the speaking. Mm-hmm. But it's also a very solitary profession, right? So you are in a set of chambers, you're competing with your colleagues. And I realised pretty early on that I actually was quite a social animal, and I liked working in teams and with groups of people. So when I finished and I was qualified for about a year and I was in chambers, I started looking around for something else. And Big Bang happened in 85, 86. Right. So that's the corporatisation of the stock market in the UK. So it was when, Cadbury and Hampel and all the corporate governance code formed balance sheets, so prudential liquidity requirements for effectively investment entities, not just banks.
And this was part of Margaret Thatcher's government's reforms, working their way through, becoming, getting things more commercial, deregulated. It was about the end probably of my word is my bond, and the beginning of look at my balance sheet, not at me. Mm-hmm. So it was very much around, they corporatised what had been partnership structures in share broking, in institutional banking or whatever. And so they needed a whole bunch of sort of new grads for these businesses, these structures. And I went into a business that was actually owned by a French bank, but it had been a private client stockbroker. It had been an investment bank, institutional business, and a funds management business. So I went in there as a post-grad and worked my way through all of those different things, and then ended up being an analyst and then becoming a fund manager. So 85, 86, that all opens up. You get in, but then of course 87, huge crash. Were you in the thick of that?
Yes, I was, and it was hugely beneficial to me. I'd say two things were very beneficial. The first one was I was one of only two female grads that they'd taken into this scheme, me and one other, so we were in a group of 100. There were only two of us. So, you can make that work to your advantage and realise that you can stand out and you can be quite noticeable. For whatever reason, I didn't get fired. And then the benefit of that was that it opened up this raft of upward opportunities for me to do different things in the business. And the upshot of that was I stayed in that firm for 10 years. So against the conventional wisdom of you should move every couple of years because you get stale and people see you as a grad and don't see you, and promote you, they gave me huge opportunities. And for my career, the options were endless. So I worked in Paris for a while. I went to Moscow and worked in the very, very early stages of the opening up post-perestroika. So I was there in 92.
Wow,
working with the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development and the World Bank. Went over there. It was like the Wild West. Bodyguard, some US dollars sewn into my clothes so that I could get myself out of the poo if I got into trouble with anything. So that was a really, really broad experience. So I ended up fund management, portfolio manager, did that portfolio management gig for about 10 years, and then ended up running a division of that business. So
it's kind of opened. I mean, something traumatic like the big crash clears the decks, you get through it, and the opportunity opens up.
It does, and it definitely happened in the 70s, certainly in the UK markets, and it happened again at that point in time. So people cleared out. I mean, the attraction of it to me was that, as a barrister, you earn no money. So I'm looking around for what I'm going to do, and there is no doubt that I thought, right, how the heck can I earn quite a decent bit of money? Because I've invested in this legal career and that's quite a lot of time and energy, but with no financial outcome. Where am I going to go to actually get on a ladder where I can earn meaningful amounts?
Forest fire analogy that economists use sometimes, that that you're there for the new growth. You just have to survive the forest fire.
Yes, you do.
I took over as business editor at the Herald in late 2007. So I guess similar sort of fair winds in terms of the GFC happening and actually all that kind of stuff. But that's skipping ahead. You were actually here by then. So somewhere in there you've come to New Zealand. So how do you go from, because there's obviously heaps of, as you say, so much opportunity. The world's opening up. You've got all of Europe, but you could have gone to New York or something like that. So what drew you to this part of the world? Well,
there was a big gap in between. The big gap in between was I got to 33 and I decided that that was the 10-year stint that I'd done. And I started to look around for the first time. And the reason I did was because my boss was 38. He was the CEO of the group and he was 38. And I think if I want to advance, then I need to move. So I got headhunted to go and run a division of a listed financial services conglomerate called Johnson Fry. Right. And they hired me to really build up a nascent funds management business. They were in financial advice. They had a health insurance business. And they had a second-hand endowment policies, if you remember those things. They had a business in that, so they had a multiple range, and they really needed to ration capital in that business into one or two opportunities. The founder was still there. He hired me, and after 18 months, the board kicked him out and made me the group CEO.
Wow. So there's some pretty hard business experience.
Absolutely horrific business experience, but absolute baptism of fire. Right, so I fired 400 people in that time. I was in my 30s. I think I was the only female of a listed company in the UK. So I got a lot of publicity, good and bad publicity, as a result of that, because I was firing people. How did that feel, that process? I
mean, obviously you've got to save a company. I guess is what you're thinking as you do that. But it's got to be tough.
It is tough, right? But the commercial imperative at that time, the primacy of the shareholder within the stakeholders of a company, that was absolutely clear then, and is more diffuse now, I think. But that, we had to do the right thing by the shareholders, and we needed to cut our cloth accordingly. And we had a change of strategy, divested 3 businesses, closed down 1 business, and then concentrated on 2 businesses, sold one of them off to Allianz, which was the private medical business, and then really built up the funds management business. Subject to a hostile takeover bid during my time there as well. So, these are quite major learnings. It's a regulated industry. It's one where you need to be approved by the regulator to be the CEO of one of these businesses in the UK. So it's serious business, right? But it should be serious business because you're a fiduciary and you're looking after people's money. So learned a heck of a lot on the job, on the tools, did a lot of the redundancies myself because I felt personally responsible for doing that and carrying the can in relation to that. Taught me how to communicate very clearly, to cascade different messages down a business. So it was fantastic for me. And the culmination of that was we sold the business away from the hostile bidder to Legg Mason out of Baltimore. They bought the business. It was their first acquisition outside of the US. And they merged recently with Franklin Templeton, so they're one of the biggest fund managers in the world. But Baltimore was their HQ then, and I ended up running their European business for a couple of years on a lock-in. I was lucky because I owned shares in that business, so I had a decent capital event in my 30s. So that was all good. But in terms of learning about money, the whole time I was there, I'm still single. I have no children. I'm not married. So I have a lot of excess income, and my real discipline was around investing and building my asset base during my 30s.
Yeah.
So instead of going down to Versace and Gucci and buying dresses, which otherwise I would have done, I forced myself into building a portfolio of investments.
Because somewhere in that pathway, you realise, well, you've surpassed, what you need to earn just to pay the rent and get the groceries.
Yes.
So money, that's where the money choices start, I guess.
Money choices start, and getting money to work for you and work harder. And I've always used debt.
Yeah.
So the way that I'd probably be different to your average Kiwi that you talk to, I mean, their dream is to pay off their house and to have a mortgage-free home. I still have debt now.
Yeah.
I use debt and leverage to purchase assets.
Yeah. So
not for flimsy expenditure, but for building an asset base and building up that asset base.
How do you feel about the risk aspect of that? Because, you could say, well, Kiwis are quite risk averse, or probably all around the world, people are to some extent.
Yes.
But I guess, you're looking at it as a risk of not doing stuff, or the opportunity cost of not doing stuff. Is it? I mean, do you feel like you've taken risks with money, or when you're using that leverage and investing, is it sort of stable, secure things?
No, it's never stable and secure in a couple of periods of my life. One at the beginning. Yeah. So as a barrister with no income, and then starting in my first job, and I was earning £9,000 a year in my first job, I went and borrowed 6 times my income in order to get a foot on the ladder in the housing market in London, and I really got going. From there, and bought a number of properties in my 30s, both in Europe and in the UK, and really that set me up, for a really, really good base. But yes, it was risky, and there were times when I was very focused on how the heck I was going to pay the bills.
Interest rates go up and things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I guess it puts it. It really sets yourself a challenge. It's really on you to keep earning some money, or keep progressing the career, to keep servicing the mortgages. Yeah,
it absolutely does. But it gives you options, right? Because if you've got some equity in those properties, you can sell things when you need to. Yeah. And you've got that flexibility. So I think my drive does come from my parents, which was all around I needed to feel financially secure. Yeah. I wanted to feel financially secure. Don't misunderstand me, we weren't poor, but I was always striving for financial security. And I'm hugely passionate about women being independent and thinking about their own financial security by themselves, as well as a couple if they're with a partner. And I don't think we spend enough time on that. So that was an absolute driver for me, and it meant I didn't fritter away the excess income I was generating.
So were there ever any things that, the question I have there is, what's your most indulgent purchase, I suppose, apart from buying properties when you're fairly highly leveraged, were the things that you splashed out on when you had a job success? Or
yeah, certainly, probably it was experiences, because I had got the asset base. Yep. I did understand, because my father was a car dealer, the difference between appreciating and depreciating assets. Yep. And even though some sports cars might appreciate, most cars depreciate the day you walk them out of the showroom, right? So I think probably money on holidays and experiences. And I was working, I thought I was working very, very hard. It was absolutely full on for me during that period. And I was concentrating on my career. I wasn't thinking about having a family or getting married or whatever until I got to the end of my 30s for the first time. But so definitely holidays, indulgent holidays, and holiday homes. I bought a holiday home in Miami, and I bought a holiday home in the south of France, and I spent great times there.
Nice.
In my 30s.
Yeah. And does it become, you talked about it being a passion, do you sort of, there's some enjoyment and satisfaction in what I guess you could say is kind of the logistics, but the actual organising of the money, and, because it's a bit of a barrier to people that maybe they can overcome by, learning or by practice, but actually making each dollar work for them, each spare dollar work for them, it can... It sort of makes some people cringe or wince, and then they don't do it. Were you able to sort of find, enjoyment in getting all the parts in the right place?
I absolutely loved it. I still love it now. I still do it now. If I'm investing in startups, for myself individually, or whether we're looking at new opportunities for maybe Mint to launch new funds. We've just gone into the alternative space with a managed fund now. So looking at new opportunities and the enjoyment and the thrill of investing in startups. I love it.
I think there's something to that passion, finding the passion for it, isn't it? Because, when you think about how difficult it is, well, there's a lot of things that a lot of people, get really into in terms of hobbies or pastimes that are actually quite complex. And, they might be following sports and the statistics and all the rest of it. The economics and the finance isn't necessarily more difficult than that. You just have to find a way to make it central to what, what you want to do.
Yes. Well, I always say to people, you can't have too many savings, and savings will give you options. And what you do with it is up to you. But at the end of the day, it gives you optionality, and the pleasure and enjoyment you get out of seeing something succeed and something go up and make you. And we've seen a little bit of that, right, with Sharesies taking hold again in terms of people punting in the market.
Video game. The idea that you can put a lot of time and effort into a video game, for example, and it doesn't achieve anything for you. You could actually look at the way you build a financial structure that way.
Yeah. So it's a big step though from punting individual shares to actually thinking long term and thinking about diversification, as well as putting all your eggs in one basket and putting it on one or two shares that you've identified.
Absolutely. You've achieved a really big business deal. You've overseen it. It's kind of like you've got to the top, really, in a lot of ways. What brought you here, and what stopped you from wanting to go on up that corporate ladder, I guess? Yeah.
So I was locked in for 2 years after we did the sale. I had, during the time that I was locked in, I had 2 children. I'd married my husband. My husband's 15 years younger than me, so our dynamic is somewhat unusual.
Right.
And when we got together, we agreed that I would slow down a bit. Let's see whether that worked or not. And that we would focus on his career and what to do next. Yeah. He'd worked overseas. He'd worked for Disney before I met him, and he wanted to go back and work overseas. And he worked for a woman in London who was a Kiwi. And she came back to New Zealand to do third generation mobile for telecom.
3G.
3G.
Yep.
So he had a work to residence visa, and I came with him. And ostensibly I was going to retire. And I didn't. 3 weeks later, I ended up being hired as the CIO of ING, the joint venture between ING and ANZ. That wasn't part of the plan, but it was a very good thing, because I wouldn't have settled in New Zealand being a stay-at-home mum, because it's just not in my DNA, unfortunately.
No.
I think my children are quite glad about that now, looking back. But, definitely that got me going in terms of the New Zealand market.
Sure. So you arrived here around just after the millennium?
End of 2004.
2004, sorry. So I'm trying to think back to where we were at. We still had Helen Clark, and, what was New Zealand like from your perspective?
Scary from a financial services perspective, deeply scary. So go back to the fiduciary, putting the customer's interests ahead of yours. Yep. Related party transactions, finance companies were going on.
They were heading into their boom before the big crash.
There were the disclosure regime, the Securities Commission was in place.
Yeah.
I found it I found it very, very hard.
So it was a little bit of a Wild West kind of scenario.
Very, very, very hard. I did a few articles for the Herald at that time, actually talking about things that maybe we needed to think about from a regulatory point of view. Yeah. So I managed to last 2.5 years there, and my husband managed to last 2.5 years at Telecom, and then we both went off and did our own thing in our own way. And he did. We bought some. We set up an MVNO. We bought some spectrum on the Vodafone license, and he set up a B2B mobile business, and I set up Mint. But my passion definitely was getting involved in the improvement in regulation and outcomes for customers. So I went on the first board of the FMA.
Right.
And obviously then we had the triaging of all the finance company cases when I was on there from sort of 2006-07 onwards. Yep. The peak of all of the cases. And
so you would have worked with Mary Holm was there and Bruce Shepherd.
Yes,
it was
they were both with me.
Put together quite a diverse board, didn't they?
There were 9 of us. A very diverse board, all with different experiences. And of course, we needed to run divisions very carefully from a conflict management point of view to make sure that, the caseload that we did. So the board operated through divisions on the cases and the triaging.
Yeah. I suppose if there's one thing about what New Zealand's done, and we did this in the 80s as well, is that once things, we sort of leave things till they get really bad, and then a lot of change happens quite quickly. Yeah. Maybe we could try and avoid that. But.
Yes. Well, I remember talking to Alan Bollard at the time about about the finance companies, literally one-to-one, and he said, well, it's not a systemic risk. But, 22 billion of mums and dads' savings is pretty meaningful in the context of the savings pool of New Zealand at that time. It was a big, big number, right? Pre-KiwiSaver, pre the magnitude of ACC and NZ Super's sort of growth during that period. So I thought it was a pretty sad indictment of the environment, really. And consequently, there needed to be a massive rebuilding of trust going on after that, because people had their trust destroyed by, both advisors and the product providers who'd effectively taken their money. And trying to explain the difference between, being a managed fund and being a finance company was, the first thing that I sort of got into, was trying to get people to understand the differences between what you do with your balance sheet and somebody else's, a trustees there looking after your money, and
so
how
this
the
was
whole
just,
thing worked.
In terms of starting out with Mint, it would have been just pre-KiwiSaver?
Yes, it was, just pre-KiwiSaver. And that was really the impetus that we would move to a tax treatment of managed funds that was a level playing field with direct exposure to assets. And those greedy fund managers who charged incredibly high fees, as Gareth Morgan would say, that was right. But the tax impost on funds, at source, regardless of the tax rate of the underlying beneficial owner, was a huge outlier globally. Because everybody used managed funds as their platform for their savings products, their private market savings products all over the world. So it needed to be very, very clear and transparent in terms of taxation. So that was a real positive thing.
Sure. And before I move on from the industry stuff, do you think we've made good progress? I mean, do you feel when you look at the industry you're in now that it's Kiwis are a bit much better served?
I do think they're better served. I mean, I think that the KiwiSaver scenario came late and contribution levels are quite low, but I understand why. I understand the burden for small employers, in terms of employer contributions, but hopefully they will grow over time. But I think we're a lot better off. It's become a beast. It's becoming meaningful in terms of balances, even though, I think it's 28,000 or something is the average balance. I think, that will grow. So I think the landscape has absolutely changed for the better. Compared to when I came.
I've got a few questions about the broader role of money in society. When you look at something like the fact that some people save, understand, compound interest and all the rest, and make money, and some people just are stuck in a trap, what do you think is the difference? What's the driver of financial inequality that you've seen over the years?
Well, look, I think education and financial literacy are the most important factors. So getting things back in the curriculum, back in schools, getting people to understand, back to the bank teller book and all of that sort of stuff, getting that in the curriculum and meaningful education about that is the beginning. And we need to get more people in work and see the benefits of seeing paychecks actually go up, not a static check of welfare. Just the power really of getting yourself on the education ladder. So broader education as well as financial education.
Yeah.
Some people are going to love it, and some people it's just going to be something they hate doing, but they know that they've got to do it. But I think everybody can find some enjoyment in it once they start on that journey, and they need to start as early as they can. And it's the regular savings that's the key.
Well, going right back to those first memories you had, I mean, that's I guess it's lucky in a way, but that early you were able to sort of make the connection in your head.
Yes.
Through parents and through some of the systems in the schools with the post office banks. I mean, it's probably a shame that we've lost that.
Yeah.
Having been successful and made some money, I mean, what drives you now is, there's a point at which you probably you are, you're financially secure. You can afford the things you want. Is money sort of more of a byproduct of success now? I mean, what is it that drives you to keep doing and creating and staying busy and doing business?
Look, I'm just really quite driven, and I would get terribly bored if I didn't do anything. I mean, people say to me, you do boards, you do some pro bono stuff. And I do some mentoring. I love the variety of the things that I do. And I'm in my 60s now, right? So I should be thinking about slowing down, but I tend to find new things and different things to do. And certainly money is not a part of that at all. It's finding things that I enjoy and I actually want to get involved with. So
beyond Mint, you've got other things going on, other things projects coming up?
So I'm on the board of Tainui, and so that's very important to me in terms of the maturity and development of the iwi. They've built a large balance sheet. I'm involved there in their transition from being really purely a property investor to having a broader portfolio. So we brought in an experienced CIO into that business, and we're now investing in a number of asset classes. Infrastructure we've done with the port at Ruakura. But that's I'm very, very passionate about that and making sure that journey continues to go well. I chair a couple of other boards, and then I've invested in a whole bunch of startups, some of which have been successful and been taken over, and some of which we're still waiting to see.
Well, that's right. I guess that's where you get back to taking a risk on startups. But I mean, it is also probably the most interesting area, right? You've got young, passionate people with ideas to sort of get involved with. Is that the plan?
Yeah, absolutely it is. And I tend to stick to the knitting of the areas that I know. So I've done a couple of financial ones. One of them was Invest Now, the Invest Now platform, where I put seed capital into that. And that was sold at the end of last year to Apex, and a couple of other exits that I've had in the last couple of years. But I'm just going to roll and go again and keep going.
That's great. Well, look, thanks, Rebecca. We will leave it there. Thanks for being on Money Talks.
Thank you very much for having me.
This has been Money Talks. Thanks for listening. If you've got feedback, drop me a line at liam.dan@nzherald.co.nz. Thanks to my producer, Ethan Sills, and my editor, Leanne McDonald. You can follow Money Talks on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll catch you again next week.